Hello, everybody. Chris Martinson here, and today we're going to be talking about finance and economics as part of Finance U. Remember, anything that you see in this video and all resources available at our websites or affiliated websites are not intended as or construed as financial advice. This is for educational purposes. Remember, if you have a financial decision, please consult a financial professional. We are not attorneys, we're not CPAs, we are not financial managers. As well, we do our best to be accurate, and everything we represent is as accurate as we know it to be. Now, let's turn to our program. I just get the sense that we have a system that's just like the Fed's got its fingers and a lot of springs in the dike, and they just, anytime the market shows a little tremor, they just throw more money at it, and that's where we're at. And every time they do that, I'm sure they go to sleep at night like they can master the universe. I saved the world, the market. All they're really doing is making the wealth gap wider. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Finance University, back with Paul Kiker of Kiker Wealth Management. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing well. Good to see you again.
Well, where do we start today? We just got another inflation reading, which was Goldilocks. As you know, I'm very suspicious of official numbers, such as they are. And they said, what did they say today? Let me pull this up here. Is it here?
Point
Oh,
three.
it's way back here.
Yeah. I think it was 0.3 versus a 0.4 month over month, which is a
Yep.
0.1% miss.
Yeah. But here, let me just pull this up real quick. So this is from the BLS, and they tell us what sort of things they want us to believe. How about this? They're trying to tell us that food at home on a year-over-year basis is up 1%. So your experience at you're just laughing. Stop it.
I can't help it.
Are you aware of the risks to your wealth in the next big economic crisis? Well, hello, I am Dr. Chris Martinson, and I have done hundreds of hours of concentrated research and collaborated with legal and securities experts on all aspects of the concepts covered in the book, The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Together, we have identified 7 key strategies that you can leverage immediately to protect your wealth from these risks and regulatory takings. Join me and 6 industry experts, including David Rogers Webb, on June 15th at 11 o'clock Eastern for a digital webinar with live Q&A, where we will outline and explain all of these strategies and how you can leverage them to protect your wealth. Further, your ticket will allow you playback of the webinar once it's posted. Thank you, folks. We'll be all week. This is the Chris and Paul Comedy Show. Yeah.
They're going to end
No,
up
it's just that silly. Come on, 1.1%. You know, anybody, you ask anybody, they're like, how many bags do you have to carry out of the store to have $500 in your hand? You know, and the number shrinks every month. You know, it's amazing.
That's bizarre. That's bizarre. So
yeah. And then they're trying to tell me that, you know, literally every single thing on this list, my experience is higher, right? So, you know, owner's equivalent rent, which should include the cost, that's sort of shelter, right? Their shelter cost is up 5.5%. I would like to send them my home insurance bill and my property tax bill, because neither of those are in the single digits this year.
No.
In terms of increases.
No, they're not. So that's rolling off of the owner equivalent rent, correct? Which has a lag behind it, from what I understand. And that's something that's going to be beneficial to the CPI data, at least for the Fed, who's foaming at the mouth to cut rates. And it looks like that lag is going to be helping CPI miss over the next several months. But that may come roaring back in 2025 on the other side of the election. Yeah.
Well, these lies end up costing us all. And of course, people who have their cost of living adjustment through the federal government lose out directly. The rest of us sort of lose out because we know we're being lied to and all that. But look at this one. New vehicles, Paul. They're trying to tell me that over the past year, they've declined in price by 0.4%. That's a year over year. That's 12 months. New vehicles down 0.4%.
That's interesting. Now, they may have about 4 or 5 months ago, unless there's that long of a lag behind it. But every now and then I'll toy around with a diesel truck, right, for the farm, and just say, hey, you know, just to look and see what the costs are. And they're substantially higher than what they were this time last year to build the same truck that you would want to build and have it shipped in. So I don't understand where that's coming from.
No, they will tell you. In fact, if you chase that back far enough, they actually are claiming at the BLS that new cars today cost exactly the same as they did in 1997. That's where it zeroes out, right? And of course, they were 17,000 and now they're 43,000. And so you might think, because you're not a BLS mathematician, that those are different numbers, but they tell you they're the same number. And they do that with their hedonics, right? They say, oh, well, these cars are a lot better today than they were in 97. I will grant you some of that, but I can't grant you a zero cost basis from year to year on that stuff, No. Sorry.
I mean, yeah, we've got more electronics. The greatest benefit that I've seen is automatic headlights and automatic windshield wipers. That's about the only major new addition that I like.
Yeah. No, it's not unfair. Cars are safer and they do last longer and things like that, but it's not as much as they claim. They overdo it, right? They got mission creep on that one. But how about this one? This one always drives me really nuts, is medical care, right? Up 2.5% year over year. And I'm just like, okay, I have to buy in this medical insurance. And it's up 14.5% this year, 16% last year, 23% the year before. It's never been less than a double-digit increase for my health insurance. And they're trying to tell me it's 2.5%. So they're off by at least 10 points on that. That's offensive.
That is offensive. Well, and in my personal experience, I go to the dermatologist once a year, just spent so much time in the sun to get checked. And the deductibles doubled from 125 to 250, for your annual visit now. So I don't understand how that is, contributes to that number being much lower than what reality is.
No, but I mean, we live in a real post-truth world. So you and I have been talking about, when jobs reports come out, our only question is how much will they be revised down in a couple months? We look at the CPI, we're like, well, multiply that by 2, maybe 5, depending on which area, and you're probably closer to accurate. But for the people who have to live with this, Paul, what are you experiencing on your end? Because you have to help people plan for this and think about how they're going to manage in a world like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible because you've got to carry two concepts in your mind, and it's one of these situations where you have to understand that we're being lied to from the data that's coming out of the government for their own benefit. And the question that I ask is, we've obviously been lied to in the past about the jab and everything that came from there, and that information is starting to come to light. The average individual is experiencing this inflation, and they're looking at the government telling them that, oh, it's not as bad as you think, and basically belittling them for expressing their frustration and how it's harder and harder to make ends meet now. So you've got to deal, at one point, what point is there anybody left that's continuing to follow their narrative outside of the halls of power? So you've got to take this information into consideration, but then you also have these markets that are just joyous at this point and breaking out across the board. Depending upon whether we close at all-time highs on the NASDAQ and the S&P this afternoon, we have broken out to all-time highs. So it's like, okay, this momentum may carry into midsummer, and who knows, they might pull it off into the election. But the reality is this is just really, really stressful on the average person, because some people in the past were able to, hey, markets are up, I'm doing pretty good. Inflation's not that bad. I know people are talking about these things that we need to be worried about, but it hasn't impacted me yet. So what's hard in working with people right now is helping them to not panic, because all of a sudden they're starting to realize that the world is not exactly what it seems. 2 + 2 does not equal 4. And they're trying to figure out how to navigate this and do it without panicking. And that's what we're able, that's what we do, or try to do, and hopefully do in a very good way, is to, okay, look, here's our exit. Let's develop contingency plans. Let's put some insurance in place. Let's make sure that we're doing everything that we can prudently do to navigate, and then play the game by the rules that are forced upon us as prudently and as wisely as we can. And now, that's a hard thing to do.
Well, it is. And particularly, we have this webinar upcoming for the Great Taking, right? And I've studied this enough now that I think my view on it has shifted a little bit. I understand. I saw what they were. So this lawyer, Jimmy Lovely, who's going to be one of our expert people, he's been, lawyering in this area a lot. And so he sent me these articles. He said, you just need to understand this is what they were struggling with in 94. So he had all these PDF screenshots and of newspaper articles and trade journals and things from people who cared about this stuff. This stuff would have meant nothing to me at the time. Now I can read them and decode them and look at them, and they had some legitimate struggles, right? They're like, oh, how do we move to this system? And people want the convenience, and we need this electronic trading. So they did the best they could. But once they created this new ecosystem, well, the raccoons of Wall Street are like, where are the crevices? How to get my paws in there and, undo the latch on your chicken coop, right? And so then they had to do some more stuff, and then the raccoons and so it's this real, chickens and raccoons, development story. And I don't think people in 94, Paul, were thinking, if we do this, eventually there's going to be Wall Street firms co-locating their servers on the trading floor with piped in fiber optics so they can trade on nanosecond timescales. They weren't thinking about like what's going to happen with literally trading stocks with nanosecond delays, right? Like, and they might hold them for microseconds, right? Held that share for 1.3 millionths of a second, Yeah. And then dark pools and all of that. But this is the system that grew up, and what we have to manage, though, and this is why we have to talk about this in depth at this webinar, which is just a stepping stone, but a good one, is, okay, that's the system. It has some pros. What are the cons? CNBC never tells you about the cons. Wall Street Journal doesn't talk about them, but we have to understand them, right? Correct. And we don't know where the risks are. I've studied this as much as I've studied anything, and I can't tell you or assess what or where the risks are. Right. I don't know.
Right.
DTCC is a private corporation. They don't have a 82-page 10K I can tear apart. I don't know. They put out a PowerPoint and they show you a screenshot of what they think their balance sheet is, and you have to go, okay, and there's no detail, and I have no clue, right? So in the context of that, you have to decide, what do you do? How much control can I exert? Control's the operative word in this whole story. Do I control the asset or not, right?
Right.
Right. It's like, I control my asset, the car, until I give the keys to my half-drunk roommate, and then I no longer control my asset, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have to just understand that whole concept.
Correct. You hand the keys off, you don't even control your life at that point. That's for sure, to a half-drunk roommate.
No, you don't. You don't.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. It's talking people through, okay, there may be different levels of individuals that fit in here. Nick's the one that first brought that kind of idea up. So I want to give credit where credit's due, or at least to me. You two may have talked about it, but those that just are so scared they want to immediately leave the system. Well, most people just can't do that. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, most people just can't do that. Now, if you've got rental properties that can produce more than enough income for you, then that's a risk that you take, but that is still a risk if this thing is something that doesn't end up being triggered at some point in the future. And then there's those who have no desire to leave the system, and they just want to be prudent as possible and have some insurance that they have over here on the side, because the reality is, well, I don't know the statistics right now, but very few people own precious metals. And even with this most recent breakout, right now, I think a lot of your followers own it because they understand the opportunity and the value and the protection that it can offer. But the average individual doesn't. Even with this breakout, I'm amazed. I've had maybe one or two local calls that have people said, hey, I want to buy some precious metals, or hey, I've been waiting on the side, I want to go ahead and pick up some. No, people are like, they're skeptical of this price rise, and they're waiting for lower prices that they may not necessarily see. But, a little bit of insurance here and a little bit of insurance there. And if you do it in a prudent manner for those that don't want to leave the system, hopefully you've set this aside in 10 years from now, it's the same price that it is today. That's the best scenario that we could possibly hope for as a society. Won't be for those that are overweight precious metals, but there's levels that levels and steps that you can take depending upon what your overall goal, desire, and resources are, right?
Yeah. And I don't think people should wait too much longer. So I was just staring down here because I'm looking at a couple of things. So first up, just understand. I mean, this whole thing, like So one of the more important interviews I did for me personally, because I love getting stuff out of interviews, was talking with Luke Groman, right? And he really got me focused on a fairly simple concept I hadn't really thought through. I mean, I knew it sort of, but he got me sharpened on it, which is, listen, the Fed's now at a point where it can't have its cake and eat it too. It's going to have to pick one. Is it going to pick saving the bond market, or is it going to save the dollar? We already know what they're going to do. They're going to throw the dollar under the bus, and if poor people and increasingly middle-class people and upper middle-class people get shredded by that, at least they've saved the bond market, because that's where all the power comes from in their story. So this is about them saving their own skin, right? So what does that mean? It means that as interest rates really start to spike and destroy things for the federal government's ability to finance the interest payments, they will go out and buy those bonds. And as the more bonds the U.S. government puts out into the market, the Fed will buy those or make sure those have buyers. And because they're not audited, we have to wonder, how did the Cayman Islands suddenly start buying tens of billions of U.S. bonds? You know, whatever, right? So there's issues there. You know, transparency would be better for a putative public agency, but they're going to save the bond market, so they're going to buy those again, which I think you see every time there's like a chance to have a little levity in the stock market, off it runs, because I think it's the correct interpretation, which is the Fed's just going to create inflation, right? So this is what it looks like today, with that idea that, you know, inflation came in at 0.3 instead of 0.4%. Bonds are up. That's what the green means here. So bonds are up, stocks are up. So that's an ideal moment for the Fed. Stocks up, bonds up. Yay. You know, but we got to look into something, which is copper poked its head above the $5 per pound mark twice already. And it looks like it's just going to keep banging until it powers through that. This is all-time brand new highs on a close on the copper. But to the point of, look at silver at $29.91, right? Let me pull that one up.
Oh, silver, I've been watching. It is so close to pulling a breakout like gold.
Yeah, here it is, up $1.22 today. But look at this. Yeah, this would be a new closing high if it stays here, if they don't, bang it back down. But eventually this is going to break out, and it's going to break out hard. And this is interesting. So one of the biggest banks out there, HSBC, they are up to their eyeballs in slamming silver whenever they can, and they have this massive open position. They have massive, like the 2024, they have just been like absolutely just throwing silver shorts into the market as fast as they know how. I mean, these are, when you have 1,200, so they're at 1,400 contracts short right now. It's just an unbelievable thing that they're up to. They're going to get taken out to the woodshed on this thing. A day like today, if you hold a single 5,000 ounce contract, right? And it's up $1,
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if Roaring Kitty decided to go after silver shorts?
Yes.
That would be
fun.
I can too. That would be really fun.
Well, I would support that, and I do. I'm an inveterate silver stacker. I love stacking silver, and so I go to Wall Street Silver, and also there's another one that got started up, and so yes, retail, so-called retail, the dumb money, is going to figure out that actually the only smart money is real stuff again, and so Paul, this is a serious thing for me. I am as certain today that I am facing the same situation I saw in 2006-07 when I was trying to tell people about this little thing called the housing bubble. Now, I was too early. 2006-07 was painful for me because I was short mortgage insurers and home builders. It eventually turned around and became very much not painful for me, but I was right but early, which can be translated to wrong for some people. I get that.
Well, they argue that, but that's not necessarily correct.
Well, my first purchase of silver was a pretty stiff purchase back when I remember it was $4.53 an ounce. I remember in the day I was, if it went up a nickel, I was excited. $1.22, I didn't even, in a single day, what's that, right? Eventually it'll be going up $10 a day, I think. And the reason for that is I've articulated for my subscribers, there's just fundamentally, there's a massive problem between mine output and demand. And that's just a thing. And against that, HSBC is just turning the old lever crank, which is if we just keep throwing shorts into here, eventually this goes our way. And someday they're going to be wrong, right? And they're going to go crying to the regulators. This is unfair. We're not supposed to lose money. And you and I will be over here like, yeah.
We're like, you deserved exactly what you got. Yeah.
Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch,
That's right.
And yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
And justice will return. Justice may be delayed for a period of time, but justice will find its way in the end. And their day's coming. We just don't know when it is. We have to pay attention to the fundamentals. We have to be prudent. We have to develop a plan. We have to be patient.
Yep.
Nothing good happens in our life without some discipline and patience. And unless you're just one of those fortunate people that, luck favors you for a period of time, but even that is cyclical, right? Something bad hasn't happened. It's just a matter of time before it does. So that discipline, that patience, that's how you win in the end. That's how those people that they write stories about that we all enjoy hearing, they didn't get there without a few scars and without patience and discipline and reminding themselves why they're doing what they're doing and staying focused on that path.
Well, discipline and patience and being able to see what's actually in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's why in 2006-07, I was positive there was a housing bubble. I knew it. I could measure it. I could see it.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the anecdotes. It was in the data. It was clear as day. Right. Afterwards, everybody says, oh, yeah, I saw that. But at the time, it was kind of lonely. There were like 4 or 5, contrarian blogs out there, Patrick.net and a few others that were like just on the dogs on the same scent. Right. Well, today I can tell you the same thing, that we have a U.S. government whose congressional and Senate leadership is now thoroughly unable to process the concept of fiscal responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
They just can't do it, right?
Yeah.
And look at this. This is from the Congressional Budget Office. This is their economic outlook from 2023 to 2033. And they basically say here from 2023 on through, they do it in percent of GDP, but these are wartime expenditures, more than 5%. Actually, these close in on 6-7% of GDP. That's a little over $2 trillion a year of deficit spending baked in the cake. Nothing happens. This doesn't include any recessions or actual wars. This is wartime spending during a peacetime economy. And this is all they know how to do. And they don't know how to do anything else. So I can, just as certain as I was about the housing crisis, I can tell you this turns into a dollar crisis. Mm-hmm. I can just see it as clear as day. Now, I might be early, right? But I'm not wrong.
Be early. No. Well, and it doesn't even seem that our government cares about protecting the dollar's position as a global reserve currency. We weaponized it against Russia. You can't trust us to follow the rule of law on a global scale with the dollar. So all of a sudden, whether the pain of changing is easier than the pain of staying the same right now, I believe the pain of changing is easier. And we're seeing the rest of the world take steps to do business in something other than the dollar. How quickly it unfolds, I don't know. But you can see the handwriting on the wall. It's just a matter of when, not if at this point.
Now, how do we protect ourselves? I mean, we're talking so leaving aside that the United States does something monumentally even dumber than weaponizing the dollar and decides to get into a trade spat or a kinetic spat with China,
mm-hmm.
where suddenly we're cut off from all this necessary feedstock, intermediary, and finished goods that we use to live. If we did something dumb like that, I would predict massive punishing supply chain disruptions as well as inflation due to just shortfalls. Yes. Not because of monetary inflation, but because there's not enough stuff for the demand that's existing out there, right? How do we get through this level of buffoonery? Like it's so comprehensive. I struggle, Look, plant a garden, get some cows, but not everybody can do that. I get that, but that's sort of been my response, and I know it's yours as well, and increasingly more people based on the emails I'm getting. But beyond that, do we just knuckle down and watch it come? What do we do here?
Well, I don't believe that's not a wise step to take. And I go back, and I've said this several times, but I believe that it matters dearly to each of us now. The book of Proverbs tells us twice, the prudent foresee danger and hide themselves while the simple pass on and are judged for it. Now, first off, we got to understand we're not going to navigate it perfectly. Okay, because we're going into the complete unknown. And in hindsight, there's going to be a few people that history will look back and say, wow, these people made brilliant decisions during this period of time. First and foremost, they made brilliant decisions because they were of a mindset that they were open-minded, they were willing to look at the data, and they were willing to make different decisions than what has worked for the past 20 years. So first off, what's worked for the past 20 years is not what's going to work during that environment. Now, I don't know if it's 10 years or 5 years or 5 months or 5 weeks before this starts to unfold. But one of the things that I've done in the past is go back and study what happened during the German currency crisis, the German hyperinflation, and put myself in the shoes of those diaries and say, okay, if I'm an investor during this period of time, or I'm advising people on what to do with the funds, what worked for these individuals? Will that be exactly what works for U.S. citizens? Absolutely not. But it can give you some indication of what might work. And then you go back and look at Japan. Okay, if I'm a Japanese citizen in the 1980s, we're bulletproof. We're buying all the land around the world. And, I can't remember what it is about the real estate was worth more than all of California at one point, or the U.S. Well, their market cracks in late 1989, excuse me, 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's down for 32 years after that. We're just now back to those nominal highs. Well, if you were a Japanese investor and you focus solely 80% in the index, the Nikkei index over at that time, if we use today's terminology, well, then you absolutely got decimated by the change. But if you were open and willing and had tools that allowed you to go 80% outside of Japan, as an example, to participate in those other economies that took the lead and had better returns on your assets, then you survived better than most people during that period of time. So we've got to be open-minded, we've got to be adaptable, and we've got to understand perfection is not going to be out there. You're going to have to fight tooth and nail to make adaptations with your funds and have tools that can guide you where you need to be. And quite frankly, if the government stays out of the way, I'm not so worried about being able to navigate it, because there will be countries internationally, there'll be commodities, there'll be investments, there'll be other currencies that will come to the forefront. What I'm more worried about being able to navigate is if the government steps in and implements capital controls and locks your money inside the United States here, and now all of a sudden you don't have the ability to go invest into, the one country, I don't know if I can say this on YouTube or not, but Russia, for example, invest over there. You just can't own it as an American citizen right now. So, that's my biggest concern, is the government putting us into this situation and then limiting our ability to protect ourselves. But what I do believe is, for those of us that are 2 or 3 steps ahead of the average person and can make those steps confidently and cautiously with fear and trembling and have a plan in place to navigate it, we'll be there before those gates shut with at least enough of a portion of our assets to be able to protect ourselves and our family and have those resources to help rebuild the community, or at least provide some light and comfort for those that are around us and our own families on the other side of it. Because I don't think people understand how devastating a currency collapse and hyperinflation would be for the average American citizen. You can kiss our standard of living absolutely goodbye, and there's no conservative way to navigate that. So, mom and pop that are baby boomers that are, choose to be oblivious to what's taking place in the economy, and their overweighted laddered bonds in that type of environment are absolutely going to be wiped out. Now, their assets will still have value, like you talked about in Germany, but they and their standard of living and their life will be wiped out, and their kids who are expecting to get this massive amount of money, that they were going to be able to retire on so that they could spend every penny they've got trying to keep up with their Joneses, to buy things they don't need, to impress people they don't like. Their life's going to be upended too. It's only those of us and the individuals that are out there that have the courage to face reality, embrace that, keep their emotions in control, and fight tooth and nail to manage their resources prudently, are going to come out of this. And I believe it's navigatable. Not perfectly, but you don't have to be perfect if you're walking a path less traveled and the herd's running off the cliff. You just need to make sure you're not running off the cliff with everybody else.
Yeah. So really well said. Two things about that. As the Fed burns the dollar, things happen, right? This really kind of shocked me reading this. So they put out a map. They said what you need to earn to afford a median priced home in your county in California. And you get down here and you start reading into this. And it turns out just in San Mateo County, for instance, home buyers need an annual income of $511,000 to afford a median priced home. San Mateo County, right?
Medium price. That's not your top end. That's just medium.
No. You need a $500,000 income. How many families have $500,000 incomes? Well, now we're in the fraction of a percent, right? So less than 1% of households can afford to buy the 50 percentile, home, the median.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that Wall Street and the banking system have laws and rules in place that threaten your ownership of nearly all the equities and bonds in your portfolio and retirement accounts? Well, hello, I am Dr. Chris Martenson, and I have done hundreds of hours of concentrated research and collaborated with legal and securities experts on all aspects of the concepts covered in the book, The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Together, we have identified 7 key strategies that you can leverage immediately to protect your wealth from these risks and regulatory takings. Join me and 6 industry experts, including David Rogers Webb, on June 15th at 11 o'clock Eastern for a digital webinar with live Q&A, where we will outline and explain all of these strategies and how you can leverage them to protect your wealth. Further, your ticket will allow you playback of the webinar once it's posted. What are we going to do with this? And so these are just spectacularly bad decisions that have been made. So I don't know if you saw this, but on Twitter, I play a sarcastic comedian, from time to time. And Chi Girl, who just interviewed me the other day, she posted this thing, Tracy, this thing that thieves climbing cell towers steal copper wire in Houston, right? So is copper, like, is that median household income? Like, we used to think, thieves stealing, copper, this must be a bunch of meth addicts. We're going to find increasingly this includes the janitor at the local school, the firemen, like this is going up. Like, I can't think that this anymore is actually just the derelicts of society. We got a couple of druggies out there, stealing stuff. Historically, that's who it's been. But my waggish thing that I wrote, I said, little known infrastructure fact, at $10 a pound copper, cell towers stop working.
Yeah, I thought that was a perfect comment to that.
But I mean, like, our whole lives get degraded. That's what I was sort of sardonically pointing at, is this idea that as this stuff gets harder and harder, like, there are real impacts to this. Mm-hmm. Stop Federal Reserve. Stop enriching the 0.1% at everybody's expense, because eventually stuff breaks because people are stealing copper off of your cell tower so they can survive. Things stop working.
That's right.
I'd rather not do that. I think let's not. Anyway, I'm editorializing again, but.
Well, and what I hope that the government does is don't instill capital controls on American citizens, instill capital controls on 60% of those dollars that are international, that if we lose our global reserve currency, that are going to be flooding in here to buy absolutely anything that they can possibly buy, which will further price out U.S. citizens. So if you shut down our ability to move our assets outside of the country and invest in the international, but you leave the gates open for that flood of money to come back here because it has nowhere else to go, that's an absolute devastation of the American people. Maybe let them buy government bonds. Hey, you can buy government bonds all you want, but we're going to let it, but you can't buy real estate, you can't buy homes. And then that way our children aren't competing with international funds that are coming home because our foolish government spending and obliviousness to what they're doing from a long-term standpoint to this economy.
Well, and as you mentioned before too, that whole thing on February 28th, 2022, where they weaponized the dollar by seizing Russia's sovereign reserves, which proved they weren't sovereign or reserves, right? That the repercussions of that was probably one of the dumbest geopolitical moves, stunts I've ever seen. Whoever concocted that in the Treasury and State Departments, those people actually, I think history will say, they did something exceptionally damaging and harmful to the country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and the average person has a hard time really understanding what took place. And I know it's an oversimplification of the analogy, but let's say, Chris, you and I are doing business with the local bank, and let's call it the Bank of Appalachia. I hope there's not one out there. I'm just picking one. And you upset one of the lenders, right? Like you cut you off at a four-way stop, you wave at them with one finger, they get mad and seize your accounts, right? I mean, I know that's an egregious example, but if they did that to you, I'm immediately moving banks somewhere else, right? Because there was no due process, no rule of law. And at the most simple level, that's exactly what they did, right? We don't like what you did. We can justify this in any way, but the road to hell is paved with supposed good intentions, and we can justify anything if we try hard enough. That's why the truth matters so much, and integrity and doing what's right, because that helps limit your ability to justify foolish behavior and evil behavior.
Well, there's a lot of evil going around these days. It's a very useful frame. I keep trying, Paul, to come up with some different, I'm always trying to come up with a theory of everything or explain things a little differently, but so let me get away from the evil good. Those are judgment words or people. So another way I've thought about this, just different frame on it, see how this lands, is that there are people who deal in reality and people who deal in abstractions.
Yes.
Okay. So if you deal in reality, you're probably a blue collar person. You've probably swung a hammer. You probably know how much a bag of cement weighs. You understand basic things like your mom and dad probably taught you how to do stuff. In fact, maybe they cut you off from buying stuff for you at an age and you had to buy your own stuff, right? And you had to go through that whole process. That was me, right? Yeah. But the abstract people, right, they deal in abstractions, right? So what is a woman? I'm not clear anymore. Everything's sort of up for grabs. Everything's an idea, and these people become the managers over time. And these people are highly destructive, Paul, because they don't know anything. So I was really offended. I put this in my scouting report for yesterday, really offended. They got all these professors, abstractionists, saying, we're experimenting with ways to dim the sun. We're just going to fly out into space and we're going to spray stuff in the upper stratosphere to block the sun, right? I'm like, well, that's kind of a permanent thing. And if that doesn't work out the way you were thinking, how many tens of thousands of years will it take to self-correct that issue? Or will you initiate a cascade of things you never thought of? That below a certain level of reflective sunlight, we tip into a new ice age. I got to tell you, 10,000 years ago, Paul, there was a mile of ice above my head right here on this spot. This place. And when it left, it was a gouged parking lot of gravel and exposed rock, I don't want a mile of ice over my head again. Can we talk about this, And these abstractionists are it's just driving me crazy,
Well, sometimes you wonder if it's not a subconscious attempt to pull off what they believe, have convinced themselves that they believe. Because if you tell yourself a lie, and this is the most dangerous thing, if you tell yourself a lie enough, you come to believe that lie. And then subconsciously you live your life. Well, it distorts your whole view of the world if you're not willing to see the truth. It distorts absolutely everything. But, it's like it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy where they create the environment that brings out the lie that they've convinced themselves that they now believe, so that just amazes me. I was shocked about that. And then you hear a report from Tennessee that I didn't even know this, but apparently the state of Tennessee passed a law that there's no chemtrailing above the state of Tennessee. Did you hear about that?
I did.
And people are talking about how clear the skies are. Hey, I can't remember where I saw that, but, it could have been, the pictures that were out there. People are commenting about how clear the skies are from what they were before. I don't know. It could have been, just a mental, a observation of a few people, but I thought that was interesting that Tennessee passed that law.
Well, I put less credence on that observation because I can't believe in my heart of hearts that a state legislature could pass a law and a federal program would immediately stop. That doesn't fit into my worldview, but maybe I'm too jaded.
Right. Well, it could be the effect that, you buy a white car and all of a sudden you see everybody's driving white cars. So they read the paper and take a picture. So I'm with you on that. But I did think it was interesting.
Tennessee, very interesting. They also were looking to reform the UCC Article 8 around the whole great taking idea. And, that got rebuffed, but at least they looked at it. And they're also talking about making gold and silver Legal tender again within the state. That's very interesting to me because this is an important idea for me, is that I don't believe it's possible, Paul, to have a deeply corrupt money system and then good things built on top of that. It's that whole foundation of sand concept, right? And so why is our money system corrupt? Because a few people sitting in a place can clickety-clack up a few billions of dollars and hand it to their friends, and it plays like real money. It's got real purchasing power. You can click that up, hand it over, and they can go out and buy Gulfstream jets and, trophy properties or trophy wives or whatever they got their little heart set on, and it's real.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I, where did that purchasing power come from when you do that? It's real purchasing power. Came from somewhere, right? That was stolen from all of us. So that's an act of thievery, right? By definition, you took something that wasn't yours without anybody voting on it, without anybody agreeing on it, and you just did it because somebody said you could, right? So I don't think you can pass enough laws on top of a foundationally corrupt money system like that. So I'm a big fan of getting back to an honest money system. And I default to gold as that medium of exchange, maybe silver, although I'm less sure because I'm not sure there's enough silver for the task anymore. Right. But gold for sure. But I'm agnostic. If you said, hey, Chris, here's this other substance that humans can't manufacture out of thin air, and it will then be a limited thing that you either, have more or less of based on your ability to save and not be profligate, I'd be okay. I'm agnostic. I don't care, but I would love to have sound money. And even if we're not ready to do a hot swap, I would go, let's put it in competition. You can either take your paycheck in Federal Reserve notes or Paul bucks, which are backed by gold, or sheepskins. I don't care, right?
Right.
You decide, and if people decide they only want the Paul bucks, and they don't want these anymore, well, then this business goes out of business, and they actually have to, just like, please tell us what we can do to get you back over to Federal Reserve notes. I'm like, well, you're going to have to be audited. I have to see what's going on, and I have to understand what your policies are.
Absolutely. But that's bringing what's into the darkness into the light.
Yes.
So that everybody can examine the truth versus the lies. Only those people who want to protect themselves and cover up their lies will keep something in the darkness so that nobody, if you don't have anything to hide, bring it into the light. Now, I don't want that argument to be used that if I get pulled over, hey, let me search your car. No, you have to have evidence and reason. But we as the American people, we need to have, and we have a reason to have evidence and reason. We should be able to say, bring this into the light. You're the government. You're supposed to be serving the people. And if it's in the dark, how do we know you're not serving yourself and your own agenda and those of your, the nepotism of those that are closest to you? Because it's clear for all to see who have the courage to look at it, that they're protecting their own by keeping everything in the dark. They just don't want they just don't want to have to admit it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I think that's coming. Again, all of this is sort of leading up to this idea. I'm as certain as I've ever been, as certain as any call I've ever made, that this path we're on ends badly. And this is even without, I didn't even get into oil yet, or what's happening to our soils or insects or anything. I got a lot of other things sort of weighing in on this idea that we're on a path that's not sustainable. But just economically, just from a math standpoint, we have a math problem. And the first place where people are going to get that clanging alarm sound is when the government's interest payments are exceeding its income taxes. That's a problem. That's a red line in the sand. Things get really hinky from there and go much, much faster. But people need to understand this too. This has been 54 years in the making. Things tend to go about that long on exponential systems before they really get a little crazy. I have the stadium example, and at minute 50, things get a little hinky, right? And so things speed up at the end. Well, we're in that stage, right? And now we're like, it was shocking to get $1 trillion of deficit in a year. Now it's every 100 days, and soon it'll be every 10 weeks, and then it'll be every day, and so on. That's called Weimar Germany, 1918 to 1923. 1918 to 1919. 1919 to 1920. 21. 22. 23. Ah! Straight in the air, right? That's how these things go.
That's right. Well, and along those lines, but not to change the subject, but kind of along those lines, one of the things I'm extremely concerned about right now, and don't get me wrong, my expectation is that the markets are going to go higher into the summer. And who knows, we're a little stretched in the short run. but we could be entering the mother of all blow off tops, right? Because if you get better CPI numbers, the Fed's been promising we're going to cut rates, this is going to save the consumer because they're going to be able to refinance down. That's going to turn housing loose again. And it may be a blow off top, but it's the perfect opportunity for people to make ridiculously foolish mistakes from a long-term standpoint. And it's going to give the perfect backdrop for the powers that be to unload their shares off to an unsuspecting public that are ever more desperate to try to make ends meet. Sometimes you're better to be pushed until you're in a position to push back, because with this inflationary pressures, kids not being able to buy homes, that's when people gamble. One of the things I've noticed in 26 years of careers, I know when people reach a point in their desperation because of their prior bad decisions, that they're going to blow themselves up or their gamble's going to pay off. And when the gamble pays off, they rarely keep it in the end, because, you look at the statistics on people that win the lottery, it tends to ruin their life. It's the rare person that ends up coming out good on the other side because they never had the discipline to manage the money to begin with. So what I'm worried about is there's people that normal people that they have discipline, but are feeling the pressures of life, or they're feeling things get behind and they start being desperate. Well, I'm going to pile all into the markets. I'm going to pile all into this. I'm concerned that we've set the perfect backdrop now if the Fed starts cutting rates to where we have this massive blow off top. I don't know how much higher it goes, and I don't even know if it goes higher, but we've certainly got the potential that's there, because all of the indicators that we see are telling us that the path of least resistance is higher. And that's going to, that could be the ultimate, first by inflation, then by deflation, they will rob you of all your wealth. And, you go back to the tulip bubble and you look at, I can't remember who it was in the tulip bubble who got sucked into it. I know Mark Twain got caught up in all kinds of, bad investments throughout time. So smart people can do really dumb things when emotions take over. And more often than not, that's what our number one rule is for most people. There's a time where, I tell people in our relationship, there's a time where I'm going to, grab you by your back of your pants and your belt, and I'm going to be pulling you back just a little bit. And then there's times where I'm going to be placing my hands on the small of your back, and I'm going to be pushing you forward to give a picture of what we need to be doing, because that's what iron sharpening iron in a good advisor relationship does. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. And, it's an oversimplified statement with a very powerful ending. It may not necessarily lead to death, but it can certainly lead to financial ruin.
It can. I wonder what you think about this then, because I've been searching for, I knew that financial conditions eased, and you and I talked about how, stocks were starting to sell off into October 30th, and then November they just turned around. And so I was just examining this chart. This is M2. For people who know, this is a broad measure of money. M2 includes a lot of things in it. So this is from the Federal Reserve website, the Fred series. Look at this, Paul. I didn't notice this till just the other day. On October 30th, M2 bottomed out at 20.5 trillion. That's what that 20,553 billion means. And do you see, look how it powers up here. Remember all that time we're like, why are stocks going up? And then they came down a little bit. M2 is exploding back up again. It's up from 20.7 to 21.1. So $400 billion since the end of February. So from March to April, we are 400 billion new dollars somehow have been pumped into the system. So for all the Fed talking about, we're, reducing our balance sheet. No, they're not.
No.
There's some 400 billion doesn't just get created in the system out of nowhere, particularly when bank loans aren't all that robust. There's not that many ways to interpret this. Somehow 400 billion came into the system.
And the bottom of that was what, October of 2022, right? So the stock market, the bottom of the
23
at 23. Okay.
Yep.
So that was when they reaccelerated in October of 23.
Yep.
Yeah. That was the Fed pivot. Yeah. And that's
that created, 400 billion all on its own during that next little run there. So that's, I just get the sense that we have a system that's just like the Fed's got its fingers and a lot of springs in the dike. And they just, anytime the market shows a little tremor, they just throw more money at it. And that's where we're at. And every time they do that, I'm sure they go to sleep at night like thinking, master of the universe, I saved the world, the markets. All they're really doing is making the wealth gap wider.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's the only identifiable impact I know for sure.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and it's not like they're going home and on the weekend sitting in the backyard helping trim the trees and clean the pool with their help, right? The average American. They're going to cocktail parties and having conversations with individuals that are in their network digit that are celebrating their moves because they're so detached from the reality of the average person.
Yeah. But here we are, right? And so this is the system we're in. And I like what you say there. Sometimes you got to be holding people back, and sometimes you're pushing them forward. There are times to go forward and back. So I'm not just perpetually bearish, but I really wish that we didn't have to exist within this. It's hard enough. Life is hard enough without knowing that the system is being operated in the darkness by people who I'm pretty sure don't have my best interest at heart. They have their best interest at heart.
Right. Well, one of the things I'm concerned about, you go back, from time to time, just to anchor myself in reality. You go back and look at some of the data that led up to the 1929 crash. You go back and look at the Nikkei that happened in the late 1980s. And, there really wasn't much of a warning. And that's my concern about what we get in here from a risk management standpoint. You're forced to play the game by the rules that are forced upon you. And if you don't play the game, then one of two things happen. If you can completely exit the game, that's wonderful. Most people just can't do that. But, if you sit on the sidelines, there are a lot of individuals. I mean, I'm shocked that they've kicked this can down the road this far. Looking back, you can see the certain forces that allowed them to do it, with inflation not becoming entrenched yet. Asset price inflation was there, but that's changed at this point in time. So it seems like the runway is ever shorter. We're running out of landing space. And, so you sit on the sidelines and watch the market go up for 10 years. Well, most people don't have the discipline to be able to do that. And especially with inflation running the way it has, they paid a heavy price for sitting on the sidelines. And then there's those that are tempted to get in right now, right? So, who knows how long does this run? Another 12 to 24 months? Does it end with a 20%, 1 week decline? I don't know how this ends, but hopefully you get a point where there's some consolidation and then you can clearly exit the system before that occurs. But if it runs up and then it gets a 20% decline, that's going to be a harder environment for most people, because then if you get a bounce that lasts a month and then you have another 20% decline with another bounce, then few people are going to have the courage to exit because they're afraid they're going to be wrong because of hindsight bias. You look back and if you didn't buy the dip, then you left some money on the table, or if you ignored that dip. And that hindsight bias, which is basically our psychological weakness, to where we take the most recent past and project it into the future, it's hard for us to see it any other way. So this is going to be a hard environment for people to navigate. And as long as they understand that, and they're working with someone that can articulate to them how they're going to navigate it, what they'll do, and where they have decision points. If they've got somebody that can help them navigate that, they're very fortunate, because they're far and few between on Wall Street nowadays. Everybody can give you the answer.
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah, everybody will give you the answer. They'll sell you the product. They'll tell you this artificial intelligence or whatever's going to do it. It's the newest product. But I have tried to find like-minded individuals, and they're far and few between out here. Most people don't even want to have a conversation about these potential outcomes, because it's like, oh, that'll never happen. Well, go play golf and stick your head in the sand, and don't get surprised when some drunk idiot runs over you with their golf cart because you've got your head stuck in the sand.
Yeah. Hey, I've got an interview with I just did with Dave Russell, who's the CEO of Goldcore. And yeah, that'll be coming out this weekend after this interview comes out. And it's still a finance youth piece, but he had some really interesting data. So I'm going to steal a little of the thunder. They sit as a company. They also have a seat at the LBMA, so they get to see some presentations. And the big question, of course, is, well, who's doing all this buying? Uh, it's not retail. Retail has been selling in the US and in Europe, right? So people are like, oh, taking advantage of, hey, let me lighten up, gold's at an all-time high. By the way, this is gold, right? This is a weekly. So we're going back weeks. This is 2022. You see here at my crosshairs, this is the $2,000 mark. Bumped its head here in March of 22, bumped its head all over the place, poked above, went back down, bumped along, all during 2023. That was the great battle. And then it poked its head above 2,000 an ounce. And then here you can see it back testing in early 2024, test, and off we went, right? So East, we've been talking about this, all the gold in the West going to the East. And I know someday the West is going to wake up and go, stop, And I don't know what you do when you don't want people to buy gold because it's an open market and you've been selling it. And now you get embarrassed that you have run out and you don't want to sell anymore. I don't know how that stops. I don't know what that looks like.
I wish I could give credit to the individual that I read the article about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was one of those articles that they have a statement in there that you roll over in your head for 3 or 4 weeks or months. I'll do that from time to time. And the statement was, the East is buying gold from the West, and they demonstrated that it's leaving the West and going overseas, and says it will never come back. Right. Because the West will not be able to afford it when they realize that they should have never gotten rid of it. And, and that evidence has continued to build. So I'm looking forward to that interview.
Yeah. Well, it's heading over there. So what does that sign mean? Right. How do we interpret that? And of course, we talked about the de-dollarization. We talked about, the fact that the United States weaponized its dollar. We talked about how, the people, it's the funniest thing. When gold goes up in the West, you can find articles are written about that just trash it. Like, oh, it's at an all-time high. It's got a little stretched. For whatever reason, when gold goes up in the West, we hate it. The more it goes up, the more the articles get negative, right? But when Nvidia goes up, not to promote or denigrate any particular stock, but when stocks go up, it's always a good thing. When gold goes up, it's a bad thing. In China, it's the exact opposite. When gold goes up in price, they view that. In India, they're like, oh, that's a good thing. That's like a that like makes you more, it makes it more attractive, and it's just so backwards, and so we've been dealing with that marketing for a long time, but that's why, to harken back, reason I like gold, Paul, is because, in silver and copper and cows and land, is because, well, gold represents reality. If you want to get gold out of the ground, it is hard work. It's a very expensive process. You have to dig a pile of rubble out of the ground about the size of an SUV to get a single ounce out of that, right? It's like a massive pile of rocks that gets squished down and it takes a lot of energy. So it represents reality, and it has 6,000 years of people saying, yeah, that's useful. It's reasonable, satisfies all our criteria for money, right? It doesn't corrode, store of value, can't make more of it willy-nilly, Because I think that's where we're going to relearn in this story. And the more I read the Bible, the more I see it, which is that if you give humans the chance to have dishonest weights and measures, they'll take them.
Yes, they will.
And that's what fiat money is. It's a dishonest weight and measure. You can just make it up whenever you want. It's dishonest, the way I measure that.
Well, and it's dishonest in the fact that you can get something for nothing. I mean, our government's shown that they can print a tremendous amount of money with no effort that goes into it. The only reason they have the ability to print money like that is because of the effort that was laid to give the foundation of trust before them, right? And that's a lot of times why wealth doesn't go beyond 3 generations, because you've got the individual that gets out there and worked hard to build it, right? They take care of their employees, they build that company. Their employees ended up being a team. They were the ones that had the head on the chopping block. So they really take care of those individuals that built that company with them. Then the next generation comes in, right? And sometimes you got the next generation that have work ethic. If the business owner had the opportunity to really focus on the children and teach them the skill set so that their life wasn't that easy. But then you've got that next generation that's like, oh, toughness is relative. Oh, Dad didn't buy me as nice a car as my friends did. So I'm going to my kid, the next one. Then you end up with a spoiled generation that the only thing that they see themselves as is the wealth of the company or the status of what they have. It's not who they are as an individual. It's what they have. So that's all they care about. And to maintain that image, they'll still plunder, kill, and destroy to keep that power. That if they lose it, subconsciously, they know they never have the ability to rebuild it. You take that business owner that started that wealth before, if he'd lost, and many of them did, they lost everything